Who's ready for a message? Okay, both of you. Today, we're going to continue our series that we've called Losing My Religion. How many of you guys grew up in church? Anyone? Yeah, me too. You pick things up as you grow up in church. You pick up some great things, some great principles, some great understanding. You pick up a basic knowledge of the Bible, which is all very, very good. But like anything, you also can pick up some not so great traits, not so great things. And so I realize it's funny how much you look back and you realize so much of my Christian upbringing had a lot of almost fear-motivated ideas, and also some superstition added to it, that Christians, we're human beings, and so God entrusts the most important thing ever, the most important message ever, to flawed, fractured, imperfect human beings. And so what you get out of that is a lot of good, and yet a lot of not so good. And so there is a lot of superstition attached to Christianity. It's kind of like don't walk under a ladder or don't break a mirror kind of thing. We'll say, hey, don't say that, you'll speak it into existence, that kind of stuff. So we think that taking the Lord's name in vain is just cussing, using his name. Those things are not accurate, right? Those things are superstitions. And so that is an extreme, but also within there is some more mild, unnoticeable religious tendencies that we all have. And the most accurate way I can describe religion as a concept, religion really doesn't have a lot to do with God at all. Religion is not really about God, it's about you. Religion is about me. So when I say we're losing our religion, that means I'm losing my Christ-centered approach towards meaningful life. Religion has to do with what you do, what you don't do, what you should do, what you have done. Religion has very little to do with God at all. And so this series is a journey through the book of Galatians, and the book of Galatians is pretty intense. The Apostle Paul uses strong language. He's as vehement and as passionate as you're ever going to find him in his letters. He is really worried, concerned about a community of churches that he founded. He started. He loves these folks. He spent time with them, and suddenly they're kind of buying into this religious approach towards God and life that is a detour from the actual truth of the gospel. A Jesus-centered life. And so I want to look at, we've been in chapter 5 for the last few weeks. I want to look at one last verse there before we move on into another section of Galatians 5. But I want to look at chapter 5, verse 7. Very simple sentence. And this one I've spent a lot of time with the last week or so, and it's a good conversation to have, I think. And so this is how it goes. You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? Now, this is right after he just said the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. That's Galatians 5:6. And then he says, you were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? Now, historically, for most of us that grew up in church, you know this to be true. Preachers tend to use analogies that are related to things that they themselves like, right? And so if your preacher is a football fan, you're going to get a lot of spiritual football analogies. Like, you need a lineman. The Lord is your quarterback. And so you need that kind of stuff. And the angels are like your defensive line. And so I was like, okay, got it. And then the gospel is the pigskin, okay? And football. Okay, so fishermen use, I guess Jesus liked these analogies too, but fishermen, they'll use the angling for Jesus. You got to use the right bait. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to use the right bait. I don't know what that means, but yes, okay, amen. And so it sounds good. And then some guys will use 80s pop culture. Oh, Jesus. So golf is a big one. You know, golf is a big, so we use analogies. Apparently, the Apostle Paul was a big track and field fan, right? He liked the Olympics. He was always plopped down in front of the Olympics every 4 years. He loved it. And so he used these running analogies a few times in his teaching. Just for instance, here's a couple. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 24. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives a prize? Run in such a way that you win. 2 Timothy, this is what he says to his young mentee that he was mentoring. This is 2 Timothy 4, 6, and 8. I fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I've kept the faith. That's him at the end of his life. And another translation says, I have finished the race. So he uses this idea of running. And so when he says to the Galatian church, you were running well, this is another analogy. And so these particular verses, these instances, he's talking about the way in which we live our lives. And so that is the same context in Galatians 5, 7 is the way you were living your lives well. Who hindered you from doing that? Now, the truth is, this is the way my brain works. Paul is saying you were running well, basically, but now you're not, right? You were living your lives well, but now you're not. This is where my brain goes. How am I doing? Am I running well? I'll come back to me. I'm like, okay, he's letting them know you were running great. Something happened. Now you're not doing so good. You're not doing it right. And so my brain goes to, yeah, but how am I running? I have a history with running. Not recent history, but I have a history back in high school. I probably told this story before, but we had gym class in high school, physical education. And so we all put on our little gym shorts and our gym t-shirts, and every so often they'd have a different theme for the class, and so we'd have basketball, which was my favorite. We had indoor bowling, whatever, and we had track and field. And so I was out there, and we were all lining up for different track and field events during gym class, and they were like, okay, Chris, we're going to line up, get up on the starting line for the 40-yard dash. And so, toot, and then I just run. And then I get to the end of it, and then at the end of the class, the gym coach, who was also the football coach, was like, okay, Chris had the fastest time in the 40 today. In fact, and then the next day I found out, hey, Chris had the fastest time in the 40 of all the gym classes. I know. Are you impressed? So they're like, okay, we're going to do the 100-yard dash. And so we all lined up, toot, and I just get going. I'm just doing my thing. I don't know that I'm good at this. I'm just doing it. And so 100-yard dash. Chris had the fastest 100-yard dash today, and Chris had the second fastest 100-yard dash of all the gym classes. I was like, who's this other guy? Line him up. So I was like, oh my goodness, I'm the Flash. I'm Usain Bolt. What are you? He wasn't a thing back then. I'm Carl Lewis. I'm so fast. And so my head started swelling a bit. And so we got to the next gym class day, and I was like, okay, you guys, you can just sit down and watch if you want. So we lined up, and like, all right, Chris, we're going to do the mile. And I'm like, okay, it's on like Donkey Kong. And so we line up, and toot. And I just take off like I did the last two races, thinking, I'm actually gifted at this. I came in dead last. And the reason being, I was built for speed, not endurance. And so I just took off running the way that I did every other event that we did. And halfway through, I was like, this is more than a mile, right? This is like 6 miles, I think. I think this is a marathon. And so I wasn't good. Now, the reason being, I was running well for those races, but now I'm not running well. I'm not built for this. I'm not doing this well. And so the Apostle Paul is saying the same thing. He's like, guys, you did great, those other races, but this one, you're not doing so hot. I'm reading this week, and I'm like, man, were they running well, though? I mean, how good were they doing before, and what are they doing that's so wrong now? And am I doing good? Am I continually doing good? Have I done good in the past, but now I'm not doing so good? What happens? And really, that's life. Life is like that. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're getting up. It's life is ups and downs, and sometimes you're focused, you're zeroed in. You're like, man, Lord, you are good, and your mercy endureth forever. And everything's beautiful and happy and wonderful. And then some days you're like, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's kind of how it goes. So this question is, how am I running? So what does it mean to run well? What is the definition of running well? You were running well. What does that mean? Well, I think there's a couple ways you can look at a race, right? Your first place, which doesn't really matter your time. You beat the other ones. You were faster than the other ones. So it's you run and win by comparison. So if 8 people run and you're the fastest of the 8, you win. The second fastest gets the silver, and so on. And so it's by comparison. Is that what this is about? Is this running well? Is it by comparison? I'm doing better than they are. I'm more effective and more committed and more faithful than they are. Is it by comparison? Now, I'll be honest with you. Humanity's drug of choice is being better than somebody else. That is our drug of choice. People love being better than someone else. Can you believe that guy? How stupid are those people? And so we love comparing and contrasting because it makes us feel better about ourselves. And so for a lot of us, this makes sense. Okay, I'm not doing as good as I used to, but at least I'm better than them. That's one way to look at it. Or it could be you're running against the clock. You're running really against yourself. So you're trying to beat your fastest time. And so is it more about that? Maybe it's more about becoming better than you were. It's just incremental, gradual improvement. I'm not as bad as I'm better, and I'm improving as I go. And so it's a steady, incremental progression towards being better. Is that it? Well, truth is, with this statement, Paul's intention is not to make this community a bunch of self-conscious runners. That's not his intention here. He's not throwing out this analogy to say, I want you guys to be self-conscious and to sit there and obsess over yourself, because that is a move in the wrong direction. Now we're back to religion. So basically, he is endorsing religion by telling people not to be religious. Is it about how I run, how I'm doing, or is it about something far bigger? And truthfully, through this whole series, we're talking about shaking free of religion, and so the focus moving from ourselves to Jesus, from my performance to his. See, religion says, I will be saved, I will be loved, I will be forgiven, provided I do X, Y, and Z. The gospel proclaims, you've already been saved, you've already been made righteous, not by anything you did, but by everything Christ did for you, and because of that, you are now a new creation. Religion would say you have to become something in order to earn something. The freedom of the gospel says you have received everything, and it's going to change you. So is this a performance review by Paul? No. It's something far more important. He says, you were running well, but something hindered you. The word hindered is the word engoptu. Engoptu is a word that means to cut into, to impede one's course by cutting off their way. So these people were running well, but then they were misdirected or detoured. The course was detoured. They were pointed in the wrong direction. So this is less of a conversation of how they're running, high knees, high knees, high knees. We're talking about the way the way they were running, not the way they were running. I've always read this verse as Paul addressing the way they're running, but he's actually addressing the way they're running. In John chapter 14, Jesus says, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. No one gets to the Father but through me. Hebrews 12, the author gives us a picture of what it looks like to be running well. So when Paul says you were running well, the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, tells us how that's accomplished. How do I run well? Well, here we go. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Let us also lay aside every encumbrance, the sin which easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, has sat down at the right hand of the Father. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So, running well has less to do with your performance and more to do with where you're aimed. What's your focus? So he's saying to this community, you were running well. In other words, you were running towards the finish line. You were running in the right direction. Somebody has hindered you, detoured you, cut you off, changed your course, and now you're aiming at something fundamentally completely different. The definition of the win has changed. What matters has shifted. The end game, the goal has moved. Your target, the bullseye, has been repurposed and relocated. So now you're looking at the wrong finish line. So Christianity was once all about Christ becoming like me, and now my whole life is about me becoming like Christ, which sounds noble. Yes, Christian is a slang term for little Christ. It was a derogatory term to say, oh, these guys are just little Jesuses. That's where the word came from. It was derogatory, and we went with it. But is the fundamental purpose behind Christianity me becoming more like Jesus? Good luck. You just have to be perfect. No big deal. Well, I'm better than I was, but are you anywhere near perfection? No. Perfect. That's the standard. We use that phrase, well, nobody's perfect, as just kind of an excuse to say, yeah, it's all fine. I'm not perfect. As if that's okay. No. You're not perfect, so you're not holy. You're not perfect means you're not righteous. But for the fact that someone who is perfect gave you his righteousness. That's the only way to get there. So, when we shift the focus to me and my incremental improvement, better than I was, better than them, now we've made this whole life about myself. Humanity turned inward. It's the fall in the garden. You can become more like God if you A, B, C. Subtle. It's incremental. It's often unnoticeable. We don't even notice that we do it. We have these conversations in church. We're like, yes, God's doing something good, and everything we talk about is me being better. As opposed to what we fix our eyes on is the author and the perfecter of our faith. Subtle, but it's effective. So the definition, you were running well, is you were running with your eyes fixed on Jesus. You were on the right course. He's the way, he's the truth. And you were in him. He's in you. You were completely, utterly dependent upon Jesus. That's the definition of running well. So with this verse, Paul is actually reiterating something he already said back in chapter 1. We read part of this the first week. But Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 and 7. I'm amazed that you are so quickly deserting him, Jesus, who called you by the grace of Christ for a different gospel, which is really not another. Only there are some that are disturbing you and want to distort the gospel of Christ. He's saying the same thing. You were running well. You were connected to Christ. You were called by the grace of Jesus. and you were hindered, you were detoured. That is to say, you bought into a different gospel. You were being disturbed and distorted, going towards a different message, a different focus. You were running well. Your eyes were fixed on Jesus, but then you became distracted, diverted by something else. You're being hindered. Jesus speaks to this very issue during his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. This is Matthew 5, 6, and 7. You find this beautiful sermon. The whole sermon really is focused on the law of God and Jesus' authoritative interpretation of the law of God. And in it, he says this, Matthew 7, verses 13 through 15. This is towards the end of the message. He says, "Enter through the narrow gate. The gate is wide, the way is broad that leads to destruction. And there are many who enter through it. The gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life. There are many who find it. Beware of false prophets who came to you in sheep's clothing, but are inwardly ravenous wolves." He's talking about not your performance, but your path. He's talking about your course, where you are. Is it the wide path? Is it the narrow way? Is it the popular path? Is it the unpopular, unmarked, less traveled path? And then he says this, and this is exactly what the Apostle Paul is talking about. There are people who are vehemently pointing you the wrong way. He calls them wolves in sheep's clothing. There are people who are going to stand in front of you and vehemently, passionately, in an articulate way, say, "This is it. Trust me." And we're going to buy it hook, line, and sinker. All right. Hold on, let me stretch. I want to pull a hammy. Let's go. We get detoured, and it happens easily. And I know I've had a lot of these conversations with people. Are people that preach religious messages who insist on you focusing on you as it relates to the quality, the importance, the eternity of your life. Are those people malicious? Are they purposely pointing you to you in a malicious way? I don't think it matters. Whether their heart is good or bad, the direction is wrong. So I don't think this conversation is to necessarily demonize. I mean, Jesus has the authority to call them wolves in sheep's clothing. But I'm not going to stand up here and say every pastor ever is horrible and awful, and every person that leads you the wrong direction hates your guts and wants you to burn in hell. I don't believe that. And truthfully, it doesn't matter. What matters is, are we on the right path? Am I running the right direction? How do I know? Well, before I get there, I want to talk about 3 reasons why we believe the wrong thing. There are 3 of many, many, many reasons that we could get into, but I don't want to take all day. But here's 3 major reasons why we buy the lie, and we buy into being pointed the wrong direction. This is 3 reasons why we get hindered in our path and our journey. Number 1, because we buy into popular opinion, majority rules. Well, this many people can't be wrong. It's safety in numbers. But really, if you think about what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount, the wide path is crowded. That's why it's the wide one. Many people are on it. Many people choose it. So the popular opinion is probably, if we're reading the scripture and interpreting correctly, it may not be the right opinion. We're going to talk about in a few weeks, we're going to talk about the fact that the gospel is unpopular. The Apostle Paul says it in the first chapter. He says, if I wanted to be liked, I wouldn't be about the gospel. It's just not. It doesn't put butts in the seats. You know what it does? You can do it. You got this. You can make it happen. You can turn it around. See, the angels are your defensive line. That stuff sells. That's why those books fly off the shelf. That's why those seats are full, because that's what I want to hear. I want to be the hero of my story. I don't want to be a support. I don't want to be the sixth man on my basketball team. I want to be the high scorer. I want to be the star. There's an analogy for you. I want to be the hero. If we're part of the Avengers, we want to be Thor. We don't want to be Hawkeye. Second thing, we buy into this because we feel like we're missing something. That Jesus plus nothing is just not enough. The gospel is just not enough. We need something more. I cannot tell you, and I don't want to harp on this, but I can't tell you how many times, how many conversations I've had over the last decade of people coming up to me and saying, hey, you preach the gospel well, but when are we going into the deeper stuff? I'm like, what do we got? What's deeper than that? And then if you kind of probe and prod a little bit, you realize what they're talking about is my performance. The to-do list, that's the deeper stuff. I'm like, is that deeper? So, but oftentimes we feel like we're missing something. The greatest Christmas movie ever is by far, without any argument, Home Alone. And you can argue, it's okay. You can be wrong. It's there's a moment of revelation on the airplane where Catherine O'Hara, this is Kevin's mom, all of a sudden realized, she's like, there's something missing. I can't. Did we leave the stove on? No, I think we turned it off. And did I leave the garage open? Yeah, I think you did. That's it. And she's like, no. And then all of a sudden, Kevin! She left her kid at the house. There's something about that nagging, you forgot something. You're missing something. So we'll be going, we're reading the Bible, we're going to church, we're in community, we're in small groups, we're serving, we're loving, we're doing this thing together, but there's those moments where you kind of like, what am I missing? And part of that comes from life is just not exactly what I hoped it would be yet, and circumstances are a little wonky, and I'm not sure what's going on here. But there's that nagging kind of something's missing, and then we start trying to gather resources to fill that felt void. Jesus plus this, Jesus plus that. It's common. We all experience that. This community's having that feeling preyed upon, taken advantage of. The last one I wanted to mention was, this might be the biggest one. We get detoured, we buy the lie because we really like control. I like being in the driver's seat. Let me do it. That song, Jesus, take the wheel. No, I got it, I'm good. Jesus, you can take someone else's wheel. I got this one. We like being the captain of our soul. We like to be in the driver's seat. And so, because we all feel this way to some degree, I'm pretty smart. I got a good angle on things. I've got a good perspective. We've curated and cultivated this theology, this belief, this approach towards life, and our opinion on things. We think our opinion on things politically and socially and environmentally, and we've got the right kind of combination or cocktail of beliefs and perspectives, and we feel like we're pretty darn good. There's a great book by David Zoll, I think, wrote it. I read it last year. So good. I definitely recommend it. It's called High Anthropology, which is a great title. And it's not talking about the store with the candles. It's talking about something. The lady's like, aw. So it's talking about something far more important than that. And he uses that word, anthropology, as our view of ourselves. And so if you have a high anthropology of yourself, you basically think, fundamentally, I'm good. God can take a day off as it relates to me because I got my stuff together. I'm pretty smart, pretty capable, pretty good. That is the perfect atmosphere for religion to take its root, because it's self-reliance. Now, the contrast would be a low anthropology, and that does not mean beating up on yourself or thinking you're garbage. A low anthropology would be a healthy understanding of our desperate need for Jesus. That I need Jesus. I don't need Jesus any less now than I did when I came to believe him. I don't need Jesus any less now than when I was a rebellious, sinful teenager. I don't need Jesus any less now than when I was going through that crisis. I need Jesus 100% of the time, always, forever. That's having a healthy understanding. The Bible says one is good, one is holy. All fall short, all miss the mark. No one is good, no, not one. To have a high anthropology is to believe that we need control. That's the best option, so therefore we get detoured into that trap. I can honestly say that Paul's statement, you were running well and now you're not, is extremely relevant to me. Because there are days where I am trusting Jesus like there's no tomorrow. And there are days where I've got no faith whatsoever. It's the Mark 9, I believe, help my unbelief. I got nothing. There's some days where the situations, the circumstances, the problems pop up. I'm like, God, you got this, and I trust you. I'm thankful for you. Let's see what you can do with this. And there's some days when even little bitty things, I'm just like, I'm hopeless. I throw up my arms. I'm like, God, this is the end of the world. I believe, help my unbelief. That is the most practical statement I can imagine. But regardless of that, the categorical difference between grace and religion shows up in those moments two different ways. And I'll close with this. There's days when we're doing pretty good. There's days when we're just not. Religion and grace will show up in two different ways in those moments. What religion will do is it'll shift my focus to me. What I must do. How I got to go into the phone booth and put on my cape and make this happen. Now, grace will shift our focus upwards, outside of ourselves, and say, I can't do this. In fact, this thing that is in front of me is too important to entrust to me. I want to call in a professional. I mentioned last week or something that our bathroom flooded. It's not a good sign when you're walking on the tiles and the tiles are like floating. Squishy, squishy. No one wants squishy tiles. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, honey, I think between YouTube and my toolbox, I can fix this. And my wife's like, for the love of all that is holy, if your family matters to you, call somebody else. So I did. And hopefully that person will call me back. Jesus help me. But this matters too much. My life matters too much. My family matters too much. My future matters too much to take this upon myself and try to make this happen. I need Jesus. I need Jesus. Pray about everything, in everything, always. May we be the greatest delegators ever, that we delegate everything onto the shoulders of Jesus. I want to read this. This is a beautiful quote from probably my favorite author, and he was brilliant His perspective was amazing. He passed away several years ago, but he's got a lot of books, and I think I own all of them, and I'm excited to take some with me on fall break this week. But he's brilliant, and I just want to share this quote. This is from Robert Capon, and this is what he says. "What role have I left for religion? None. And I've left none because the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus leaves none. Christianity is not a religion. It's an announcement of the end of religion. Religion consists of all the things believing, behaving, worshiping, sacrificing the human race has ever thought it had to do in order to get right with God. About those things, Christianity has only two comments to make. The first is that none of them have ever had the least chance of doing the trick. The blood of bulls and goats can never take away sins. See the epistle to the Hebrews. And no efforts of ours to keep the law of God can ever succeed. See the epistle of the Romans. The second is that everything religion tried and failed to do has been perfectly done once and for all by Jesus in his death and resurrection. For Christians, therefore, the entire religion shop has been closed, boarded up, and forgotten. The church is not in the religion business. It never has been and never will be. In spite of all the ecclesiastical turkeys through 2,000 years who have acted as if religion was their stock and trade, the church instead is in the gospel proclaiming business. It is not here to bring the world the bad news that God will think kindly about us only after we have gone through certain creedal, liturgical, and ethical wickets. I love that word. It is here to bring the world the good news that while we are yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. It is here, in short, for no religious purpose at all, only to announce the gospel of free grace. Pretty good stuff. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9, we read it earlier, that all run, but one receives the prize. We get very focused up on that idea of all run to win, that we skip over the most important part of that sentence. Only one wins. There's one winner. And try as I might, it ain't me. One wins, and that's Jesus, who has finished his race, who has won the prize, who has secured for us everything we could ever wish for, hope for, want for. By his performance, his perfect work, it is finished. He fought the good fight. He won the race. He kept the faith. As none of us can, he did. Though we are faithless, he is faithful. Jesus has done for us what we can never do for ourselves. It is the good news of the gospel. What this world needs, what you and I need, is not good ideas. We don't need good tactics. We don't need good principles. We don't need good advice. We need good news. I don't need to get up here and be your running coach and tell you how to live this life more effectively and better in a way that will honor and please God. I'm here to tell you that Jesus has already done that. And then he turned around and took his gold medal and put it around your neck. You are righteous. You are holy. Not because of how you've run or how you haven't, but because how Jesus ran and what he freely gives you because of that. You were running well. Now you're not. What does that mean? You were running the race that God already ran through his son Jesus. You are running with your eyes fixed on him, the author, the finisher, the perfecter. And now you've taken your eyes off the prize. You've been hindered. You've been distracted. And now you're running with you in the bullseye. You are the focus. You are the point. May we lift our eyes. May we lose our religion and fix our eyes on Jesus, the author,